Sound.
All right, okay. Right, so this morning, lads, we're going to speak about the art of coaching, right? So when we had a look at week one in terms of coaching principles or collective principles, if you want to call it that, and when everyone done that task, nearly everyone had the art of coaching tied in somewhere within that schema or within that spectrum, okay? So I think that we all appreciate that coaching is now seen as a social art as much as it is anything else, and that the art of coaching plays such a huge role in terms of, you know, your ability to communicate, your ability to connect, your ability to build relationships, your ability to own those softer skills of coaching, right? So what I want to do today is, first of all, I'm going to tell my favorite coaching story, right? Okay. And then I'm going to give you an idea in terms of thinking a little bit outside the box on, you know what I mean, what the art of coaching is. And then I'm going to give you an example of a model I have in terms of how we integrate the art and the science of coaching and we bring it all together, okay? So I think that as a coach, we all need to have stories, okay? Stories create analogies and they allow us to frame things to our athletes, okay? And one of my favorite coaching stories is the story I'm going to tell you now, okay? So if you know your history, which I'm sure most of us do, so if we remember, well, we don't remember, but if we ever read about or see the images of the summer of 1936, okay? And again, if you know this, you'll know that this was the Berlin Olympic Games, and we know that this was one of the most impactful sporting events in the history of mankind, okay? And during those Olympic Games, they were held in a tense, politically charged atmosphere, okay? And these were seen as Adolf Hitler's games and his chance to prove his supremacy, okay? And of course, there was an athlete, an American athlete from the United States who stood up in the face of tyranny at those Olympic Games, and that was Jesse Owens. And as we know, he won his 4 gold medals and he made his political stance against Hitler at those games, okay? But what a lot of people don't know is, right, that on the morning of August 4th, okay, Jones had already won 1 gold medal, okay? He had just finished the heat of the 200 Olympic, or the 200 meters that morning, okay? And he didn't see the 2 flags being risen to start the long jump event. So he didn't see the flags risen. He walked down to the pit, okay, with his tracksuit on, and he done a practice jump. And after he'd done his practice jump, the judges turned around to him and said, "That's your first jump when you fouled." Now, lads, this is a true story, okay? So he said, "What? I fouled? I was only doing a practice jump." And they said, "Yeah, the flags were risen. That was your first jump." So he started to panic and he thought, right, okay, I fouled my first jump. Let's get warmed up and let's refocus here. So he reset for his second jump and he fouled again. Okay, now picture this. Everything that was weighing on Jones' shoulders, he knew how impactful these games were going to be. And he was now, after fouling his first 2 jumps on the prelims in the morning before he even got to jump in the last 12 in the long jump event. And what I mean by prelims is you have a qualifier first thing in the mornings, and the top 12 athletes qualified to jump in the finals of the long jump in the evening. He hadn't even got a proper jump. He had 1 jump left to even make the finals. Now he was panicking. And the other thing we need to remember is at the Olympic Games, there's no coach. So there's no coach allowed in the arena. Your coaches are in the stands. They're not in the arena. So you're on your own, okay? So, of course, like, Jesse had a coach, but it came in the most unusual form, okay? And it came in the form of a guy called Lutz Long, okay? And you'll see an image of Lutz here. And Lutz was a really good high long jumper himself, okay? He was German, right? And if you were to look at him, he was the stereotypical image of Hitler's supreme race. He was tall, blonde hair, blue eyes, and he was Germany's golden boy when it came to the long jump. He was the biggest competitor that Jones had in that event. And he walked up to Jones and he said, and this comes from Jesse Owens, this is written down here below the picture. He said, why don't you just draw a line a few centimeters back from the board, take off from there. You'll be sure not to foul. You certainly ought to jump far enough to qualify. He said, what doesn't matter if you don't finish first in these trials? It's tomorrow that counts. All you have to do is qualify. And Jesse Owens listened to him. He settled down. He took his advice on board. He took his last jump and he made a qualifying jump for the finals that evening. And the thing about it is, many people would have predicted that Lutz would have been Jesse's arch enemy. But Lutz was much bigger than that because he wanted to compete against the best. He wanted, if he was going to win an Olympic medal, to win it against Jesse in the biggest stage there was, which was the finals that evening. And more importantly, Jesse trusted him. He listened to him. He never knew him. He had never spoke to him before that meeting. So later on that evening, Jesse goes out and takes his first jump and he nails it. He nails his first jump. Lutz takes his first jump and he draws with Jesse. So now two of them are drawing off their first jumps. Jesse goes out again, takes his second jump, beats his first jump. Lutz goes, takes his second jump, and again draws with Jesse. So now these two lads are neck and neck. Okay, the whole world is watching them. It's the United States against Germany. Then Jesse goes out, nails it on his last jump. Lutz doesn't match it. Jesse gets the gold. And the most poignant image is, after Lutz didn't get the last jump, Jesse walked up to him, the two men embraced in front of Hitler, and Hitler turned around and he couldn't even look at it. He couldn't even look at it. And on the biggest stage of all, it just showed that the power of having someone to coach you and the overriding message that everyone is a coach, you just have to identify yourself as a coach. And the story doesn't stop there because this, remember, was the 1930s, okay? This is pre-Facebook, pre-emails, many of the communication methods we have now. The two men stayed really good friends, and this is the famous image that if you Google this story, this is the famous image from this story. And the two men stayed really, really good friends, okay? Lutz was drafted into the army, but they used to write to each other quite regularly, okay? And Lutz was later on killed in battle, okay? And one of the last letters he had wrote to Jesse was, please find my son and tell him that the power of humanity can be strong and this is the future of humanity for our race. And that was, this whole story developed from one coaching act. And can you imagine how Jesse Owens' story could have been so much different if he had not been coached up on that one jump? Could you imagine how the story of the Berlin Games would have been so different if Lutz didn't decide to coach him up in that moment? Could you imagine how the story of just the whole political climate for so many years after that would have been so different, the course of history, if Lutz did not decide to be bigger and to step up and identify himself as a coach? And we speak about the technical side of coaching. We speak about, you know what I mean, the technical models and the harder skills. But here was my favorite coaching story on the art of coaching. Because between the two of these men, if there was not trust, now you're talking about a black athlete, a white athlete, you're talking about the symbol of Adolf Hitler's race, okay? And then you're talking about the symbol of the United States. You're talking about two men competing in front of the whole world, supposed enemies, who came together, who trusted each other, who took advice from each other, who coached each other up, all in the name, okay, in my opinion, of sport and humanity. And that's how everything is interlocked. And that's my favorite story of coaching, or at least one of them, because I have loads of stories. So I think as coaches, we need to have loads of stories. It's really important that we paint these pictures through stories. Now, what I want to do is I want to reframe this a small bit, okay? And I want to give you an idea, all right? So when we think of coaching, right, we'll walk into a gym scenario, and how often do you see a spotter? How often do you see someone spotting someone? And a spotter isn't just a spotter, because Lutz, on that day, he was a spotter for Jesse Owens. That's what he done. He spotted him. Because a spotter is someone who forgets about what they're doing in the gym, and now all their attention and their focus goes on someone else. It goes completely on someone else. And when you look at spotting, what do you need to spot properly? You need the technical knowledge. You need to know the rules and the regulations. You need to know the lift. You need to know about the equipment, where the person places their body relative to the bar. So the biomechanics of the movement. You need to know what mobility requirements are there, because you need to know the depth of the squat. You need to be able to technically break down the squat to cue the person in front of you. So you know when to pull and when to push. And they're all the hard skills of spotting. But then, more importantly, okay, the bedrock of spotting someone is there has to be trust. You're not going to let someone spot you if you don't trust them. And as a spotter, you have to show you care, because you have to be totally engaged in that person who's completing the lift. You can't be looking at what's going on left, what's going on right, looking at your phone, looking over your shoulder. It's got to be that person in front of you, because that person is trusting you with their life, because they have a lot of weight on their back. You got to be focused. You got to be focused just on that person. And then you got to know that person's personality. Do they like to be amped up? Do they like you to slap them on the back and get them going? Do they like to be quiet? Do they like to listen to their own music? Do they like to be just left alone? Then guidance. Do you offer them guidance on the lift? Or do you know that they know the lift well enough that they know their limitations and when they need to pull and push? Then they're performing the lift. At what point do you need to know, do they need some assistance? Because there's a fine line. There's a fine line between giving them a little bit of assistance and knowing if they can grind it out. And you need to know the person in front of you before you can do that. And then do you motivate when they do the lift? And even more importantly, when they complete the lift, do you know if you can ask them for one more rep? Do you know if they have one more rep left in the tank? So when we look at a spotter, we might just think, yeah, it's a spotter. It's not. To me, spotting someone is the prime example of both the art and the science of coaching coming together. It is the integration of both the art and the science. You cannot spot someone, the bedrock of the whole lot, if you do not trust that person, or if they don't trust you. Because if you have a lot of weight on your back, you're not going to allow that person be in behind you. You're not going to be confident underneath the bar. You're not going to be able to set your intention on your lift. So I'm just trying to reframe the art and the science with some practical examples of what it looks like. And then if we want to graph this, or if we want to put this into some form of an image, these are what we normally see. You know, art one side, science another side, hard skills one side, soft skills another side. And as I said at the start, it's a social practice. So it's an integration of both. If you're too much on the side of art, then you don't have your knowledge or your expertise or your principles, okay? And therefore you don't have anything to guide your decisions. But then if you're too much on the science side of things, then you're missing out on awareness of yourself and awareness of your athlete. So we bring them together. We integrate them together as much as we can, because that's what it is. And my model of integrating it comes through these three areas, okay? So first of all, we need professional knowledge. So we're starting with the science, we're starting with the hard skills. We need professional knowledge. So the sport, we need to know the governance, the rules, and the regulations. We need to know that. We need to know the rules of our sport. We need to know the rules of engagement, okay? Because remember, we need to be able to manipulate rules, because that's what rules are there for. Okay, if we don't have rules, when we go on a field, there's a reason that there's a sideline, that there's a halfway line, that there's a 21, that there's a 45, that there's a 65. They're there because they set boundaries. And those boundaries guide our decisions, guide how we technically and tactically lay out our sessions and our games. Then we need to know about our facilities and our equipment. We can't just, someone rings you to do a session, can't just rock on somewhere without knowing, the size of the field, what the conditions of the field are like. Are we on AstroTurf? Are we not on AstroTurf? How far away? We play a match tomorrow morning. You're going to want to know how far away the dressing room is from the field. Where are we warming up? These are all things that we need to know. And as coaches, this is back on us. And then techniques and tactics. So when we talk about our sport, we need to know those three areas really, really well. And then professional knowledge around our athletes. So we need to know our athletes' capabilities within the stages of their development. And there's a difference between chronological age and biological age. They're two different things. So you could have a 16-year-old who's really strong, a lot bigger than everyone else for his age, but he might have that biological age, but he may still be massively immature. Massively immature. So we need to get the balance right there. And actually, it moves on to athlete motivation. I think the best guidance for maturity is motivation. I have had young lads who 14 years of age, who I've given them a program, and they will come to me, ask me a question, and they'll go about their work like ants. Not distracted by phones, not distracted by other people. They will set about their work really, really well. And I've had 24 or 5-year-olds who I will give them a program, and they'll leave programs thrown around the place. They'll be distracted by lads. They'll be talking about a match on a Monday night, and their heads are all over the place. So to me, when we talk about stages of development, I'm looking at that attentional capacity. I'm looking at their ability to assimilate and take direction. And that's all tied into motivation. And I see that as the best indicator of a stage of development. Then sports science. We need to know about biomechanics and physiology. They're the most important areas, I feel. We need to know about, okay, how am I going to drive a physiological adaptation based on the drill, the skill, or the game that I'm going to play in training. And then if I know that, I know when to push and when to pull. I can, as a strength and conditioning coach, I can liaise with the skill coach, and I can say, right, let's work on a time scale in a field of this size, because in numbers of X, Y, and Z, with rules of A, B, and C, because I know that we can drive a physiological adaptation by using a bigger field, smaller playing numbers, have high coach motivation, because that's going to, or interaction, that's going to drive motivation. And what we're going to do is we're going to eliminate these three core skills, because that's going to speed up the game. And the outcome is we're going to get a higher physiological drive. If we don't know this, then we can't communicate and get these messages across within our coaching management setups. Then growth and development. Then psychology. We need to understand around psychology. Don't think we have to have a master's degree in psychology, but we need to understand, and we need to be educating ourselves professionally around those areas of psychology. Again, I've used this word, when to pull, when to push. when to motivate, when not to motivate. It was like the lockdown. I left all my athletes alone for the first 3 to 4 weeks of lockdown. I didn't want to see them because there was so much going on in their minds. Do I do my leaving cert? Do I not do my leaving cert? Am I doing my junior cert? Am I not doing my junior cert? How bad is this virus going to be? Is my grandmother going to get sick? Is my grandfather going to get sick? Is my mother or father going to get sick? Do they really need me shouting at them to log into their train aerobic to give me their energy, sleep, mood, and wellness every morning? Did they really need that? Did they really need me onto them about doing push-ups and pull-ups? I just left them, give them space. Let them generate the hunger and deal with all these lifestyle stresses. Fuck, it was stressful for everyone. Not to mind the 16, 17, 18, 19-year-old. It's even more stressful for them. They don't have the life skills that we have. And as much as we like to think that we can prepare them with all these life skills, sometimes the best way to prepare them is just to leave them alone and figure it out themselves. And then the business of sport. I think like that, we don't have this as much in the GAA industry, but like I'm also coaching a professional boxer at the moment. And now I'm starting to learn about the business of sport. It's phenomenal. You know, he's dealing with sponsors. He's on a training camp in Lanzarote at the moment. He's dealing with the business side of things. And it's just such an eye-opener for me because he's a fight. He has to sell his own tickets. He gets his share. He's to collect the money. He has to give change out. If a fight is cancelled, he's to give all the money back and refund people. And he's dealing with the business side of things. And it was just, again, both refreshing, educational, but also confronting for me to see that side of things because I didn't realize there was so much that went on in that. Then the foundational skills professionally, language, basic maths, computer literacy. Are we good on Excel? Are we good on SPSS? Are we good on Word? You know, can we, if we're using the whiteboard, you know, what's our spelling like? What's our handwriting like? Can the athletes read it? If I'm writing a session on a whiteboard, can they actually read that? You know, things that we really don't look at. And next week we're speaking about communication, and the whole lecture is on communication methods, and it's something that we overlook, but you know, something that you really need to work on. If your language, if you're, you know, again, I spoke to Joseph Coyle a couple of weeks ago, and when he was out in China, he had an interpreter full time. And I said, what's the most refreshing thing where you're working now at the moment? And he said, I don't have the language barrier. He said, I don't have to deal with an interpreter all the time. So now it's so easier to communicate. And then we have interpersonal knowledge. So once we have our professional knowledge, we have interpersonal knowledge. So then the social context, the welfare of athletes, dealing with parents and fellow coaches. Huge, huge, huge. So important. You can have all the professional knowledge in the world, but if you don't have the self-awareness to know, okay, where does the welfare of the athlete come in here? But even more importantly, where is the line here? How can I deal with the parents here? Because parents are hard to deal with. Let's call a spade a spade. Some parents are refreshing, more parents are not. Some parents are really driving their kids, more parents are not. It's the handbrake and the accelerator situation again. Then officials, referees, and committees. I fall down in this in the heat of a game. Sometimes I get excited on the sideline. And I don't carry myself that well. Some people can say it's passion. More people can say that it's getting caught in the heat of the moment. But, you know, sometimes we have to check ourselves with that. And at least we have to be aware of that. You know, are you an absolute lunatic on the sideline where you're not thinking properly because you're jumping up and down and losing your head? Or are you cool, calm, collected in your thoughts? Then how you deal with referees and how you deal with committees. It's really, really important, especially in the GAA. You know, are we able to sit down and put our thoughts across to committees? Can we express our vision for the team when we speak to fellow committee members within our own club or clubs around us or clubs we're working with? And then the media. You know, do we check ourselves and speak to media and give interviews? You know, come here. We see it. I think the media pick up on this. You know, I think I can openly speak. I know this is recorded, but I feel confident enough to say that when Kilmallock played the Piercy there a couple of weeks ago, I thought, you know, the interview with Birmingham was very harsh on him, if I'm to be honest about it. I think they really asked him some really hard questions. It was on TG4, and I thought he dealt really well with it. I thought he was excellent. You know, they put him on the spot. It was his first match in charge of a really big club, and I thought he dealt really, really well with it. Really well. And then with interpersonal knowledge, relationships. We're in the relationships game. We're not in the drills and the tactics game. We're in the relationships game. We're not in the sets and reps game. We are in the relationships game. So communication. Going to speak for an hour on communication next week. So I'm not going to go on a tangent here. Empathy and sympathy. Do we know the difference between empathy and sympathy? Sympathy is, yeah, I feel sorry for someone. Empathy is, I know what you're feeling because I felt that before. It's a deeper level of connection. If you have tore your ACL and you meet someone who's tore their ACL, you will have a deeper level of connection with that person. If you haven't tore your ACL, you won't, because you've never experienced it. That's the difference. Empathy gives you connection on a deeper level. So if you have it, you leverage it. Then actively listening and questioning. Say this all the time. 10, 15 seconds, every player, every session. How are you today, boss? How's life? How's work? How's business? How's the girlfriend? How's the boyfriend? How's the mother? How's the father? How are your exams going? How's college going? That's more important than you laying out cones on the field. And when I say that, I mean actively listening, not ticking a box, because players pick up on that. Players know if it's a box ticking exercise. They're not stupid. You actively walk up and you get to know your players. And if you know your players, you'll know that there's some of them who will want to talk to you. You've got to allow more time for that. Or you've got to do it in a different way. Send them a text message before training. Give them a phone call before training. Meet them before training. Have a coffee before training. When I'm with the footballers or Wednesday night gym session, I leave the house at 6 o'clock for a gym session at 8 o'clock. I have spent as much time having coffee in the petrol station in front of Fit 100 as I have been in Fit 100. And it's just a 20-minute conversation. And to me, that is just as important as any rep, set, lift, or mobility drill they'll do at the gym. And then appropriate conduct. So where do you draw the line? Are you working with female athletes? Do you really want to meet female athletes on their own for a coffee? Maybe you do. That's fine. But you need to be conscious of that. And then you need to be conscious of where those other female athletes within that group and their perceptions of that, and where you're meeting them. You know, would you have a conversation in a car with a female athlete? Just the two of you? Maybe you would. Would you prefer to meet that athlete in a busy restaurant and coffee shop? Maybe so. Would you meet her for a drink? Would you meet a female athlete like you'd meet a male athlete for a bit of lunch in a restaurant? These are just considerations, and I think they're really important. Athletes who are under the age of 16, again, like some of them are more mature than 24 or 5-year-olds, but yet you still have to consider the age. And then coaching methodology. So learning theory and methodology, and putting that into practice. I'll give a whole lecture on the self-determination theory and motivation, which underpins my coaching philosophy. But I actively bring that to life all the time. And I feel at this stage of my life, I could write a PhD on that subject. Then creating a positive learning environment. So are we allowing mistakes to happen in training? How do we, as coaches, react to those mistakes? Are we aggressive? Are we shouting and roaring in front of the group? Do we walk up to a player and put their arm around them and say, You know, you've done X, Y, or Z, maybe if you try this. Or do we say nothing and let them figure it out for themselves? Even better again, do we define mistakes? Do we define mistakes so now the athlete knows what's a positive and what's not so positive in terms of making those mistakes? And tied into that then is instruction facilitating. How often do we give back instruction? Going back to the spotter, person has the bar on their back, are you going to shout 10 cues at that person? Sink your hips, load your heels, chest up, head up. Person's probably just wants you to shut up, they know what they're doing. If it's a beginner, would you shout 10 different things when all that person is thinking about is how awkward the bar is on their back? So instruction is really important. How many coaches, and this is the thing about it, as coaches, we're generally introverted. We're social creatures. So we like talking. We like speaking. Actually, possibly one of the best hurling coaches I know, his biggest Achilles heel is he talks too much. And I've told him that, and he still doesn't listen. And he still doesn't listen. He talks too much. And some of the best motivators, but not such good coaches, have had the ability to talk very little, but talk when it counts. And then when they do speak, their words mean more. And then observing and evaluating and offering that feedback. Where do you stand on observations? Are you constantly scanning the pitch? Do you stand in the one position? Do you use video feedback? Do you have 3 to 4 coaches in different areas observing and bringing that back to you? Where do you evaluate and how do you offer that feedback? And then demonstration and explanation. Example, I'm not going to demonstrate something on a hurling wall because I hold the hurley the wrong way. So I'm not going to do that because I know that how I think it looks and how it looks are going to be 2 different things. And your words will have more meaning when you can physically perform the task. If you can't perform the task and you're trying to demonstrate the task, it's diluting the player or the athlete's perception of you. And some people will say, no, I don't think so. It does. It does. Especially younger athletes. It absolutely does. So then have we a strategy around that? Do we ask someone else to demonstrate it? I remember the famous story, I think it was Michael Phelps, forget the guy's name, who, like, his swim coach couldn't swim. So I'm not saying that you have to be able to perform it, but if he couldn't swim, he wasn't in the water breaking his technique down technically. He could articulate that really well. Maybe he had someone else in the water with him, I don't know. But he had found a way to articulate and coach without having to demonstrate. So you don't always have to do that. Pick someone else within the group to demonstrate it for you, but don't pick the same person all the time. The optics aren't good when you do that because it looks like you've favorites. Pick someone who can demonstrate it well and share the workload across the group. Then, of course, we have interpersonal knowledge. And that's our coaching philosophy, what our identity is, what our values are, what our beliefs are, and what our leadership styles are. So if you don't know your identity, you cannot help anyone else find theirs until you know yours. And a big part of what we do in coaching is helping people find out, explore, reflect, and develop who they are as a person. And you can't do that until you have a good grounding of it yourself. Remember, a coach is someone who can bring you somewhere where you never thought you could go. That's who a coach is, okay? And then values. What are your values as a coach, as a person, as a human? Because again, if you don't know your values, you certainly can't guide anyone else towards finding theirs. And then your beliefs and your leadership style. Are you a dictator? Do you like to have an athlete centered training philosophy? Do you value relationships? Do you value handing jobs out to other people? So do you delegate? Are you a delegator? And do you like to have a hierarchy where you're at the top and have all these foot soldiers running underneath you? Or do you like being in the trenches where the rubber hits the road, actively coaching? And I'm not saying either is right or wrong, because many coaches have been successful using a number of different leadership styles, but I certainly know what mine is. So this to me is the most powerful coaching formula. Now you can call it a holistic coaching model, right? But this is my model, okay? This isn't my coaching philosophy. This is greater than that, okay? My coaching philosophy is part of that. So I feel that you need to have, first of all, the professional knowledge. It's important. So you need to have the science and the hard skills. You need to be constantly reaffirming what you know. You need to be constantly challenging what you know. So you're challenging your bias towards using different techniques or different principles. However, you have to follow a first principles approach, and that is, what am I sure I know about something? And when I strip it all back, what am I guaranteed is there? Then that underpins your professional knowledge. Then you need to have your interpersonal knowledge. That's knowing yourself as a coach. So that's your coaching philosophy, your beliefs, your values, your leadership style. And to me, the coach-athlete relationship is key, because I am a relationship-based coach. That's what I am. So I have my professional knowledge that underpins into my interpersonal knowledge, and that works out into my interpersonal knowledge. And that's my relationships, my communication, and I mean relationships with staff, relationships with committees, relationships with athletes, relationships with families, relationships with family members, relationships with the backroom who I'm working with. So important, because now if I have good open relationships, the communication style is good, then we're building something. So professional, intrapersonal knowledge, interpersonal knowledge, that's my holistic coaching model. So, key take-homes. The use of art and science in our coaching should be like yin and yang. So it's like black and like white. But with the world's emphasis on numbers and stats, we need to shift the focus towards the intangibles of our art. So we can't objectively measure some of the intra and interpersonal skills, but I would suggest that they are as important as having the science. So the art of coaching is developed through relationships. So we need to look for these in our coach development. Say this to you time and time again, lads, right? I've said it so many times, so many times. Connection, trust, relationship. That's the art of coaching. That allows us to build strands. So think of a rope, and every strand of a rope is another deeper level of a relationship. And the thicker, the more strands we have, the thicker the rope is. And then the thicker the rope is, the harder we can stretch the rope, the harder we can stretch the relationship, the more we can ask of our athletes. If that rope is thin, and we ask more of our athletes, then we're going to snap the rope. And then it all breaks down. And what we must realize is the art of coaching is not about order, prediction, or control. You can't get a statistician to put the art of coaching into SPSS or into Excel or into whatever software to throw you up a number. It's not about that. It recognizes the complexity of sport and the need for creativity. So the art of coaching interprets people as imaginative, evolving living organisms, not machines. So therefore the focus is placed on players, relationships, and the group dynamic. The constructing of deep, sincere understanding of everyone. That is relationships. So our task. Through the use of a story, through the use of an image, but I love stories, illustrate how coaching is both an art and a science. So I've done it twice in this chat. The story of Jesse Owens and Lutz Long, right? That illustrated how the power of coaching, that if Lutz Long wasn't a coach, but he identified as a coach. He identified as a coach and he offered guidance. So everyone is a coach. If you're a parent, you're a coach. If you're a teacher, you're a coach. If you're working in the local shop, you're a coach. You don't have to have a PhD in physiology, or you don't have to have won 2 All-Irelands to be a coach. Everyone is a coach. Everyone has the ability to coach you up. Absolutely everyone. Our players are coaches to each other. Because when you coach something, you learn something at a deeper level. But you also connect with someone. And that story of Lutz Long and Jesse Owens is about connection, not about like political hostility. That's the greater story. But what underpins that is the art and the science of coaching. Because Lutz Long knew the technical features of the long jump, so he could help Jesse Owens. But not only that, that was the science of it. They were the hard skills. The art of it was he had the ability to communicate. He had the ability to connect. He had the ability to gain trust. And then Jesse Owens was coachable. So he had an open mind. He trusted what Lutz told him, and the rest is history. So that to me is a really good story that illustrates how coaching is an art and a science. And then spotting. That was the second one I told you about. Spotting is a prime example of both the art and science of coaching. So the task is, I want you to come up with a story or an illustration, just like I did, because I give you an example of both, on how coaching is both an art and a science. And what these little tasks do is they give you a deeper understanding, a deeper knowledge base, and it gives you more stories for you to draw on to help your coaching practice. And it will allow you to coach other people up. So lads, thanks for listening. As always, this will be posted up live on the WhatsApp group and in the Upgrade Online Members Program as well. Thanks very much.